August 1978, Cedar Falls, Iowa. Dust kicks up from a pickup truck rolling past endless cornfields. In the back seat, three Soviet engineers clutch their notebooks, gray suits sticking to their backs in the summer heat. Viktor Petrov, Dmitry, and Yuri came to America expecting to find backward farming methods they could laugh about back home. They were told American agriculture was wasteful, inefficient, built on the backs of exploited workers. Then farmer Tom Richardson rounds his barn and points to a sleeping green giant parked in his field. "That's my John Deere 7700, he says with a grin, 25 feet wide, bright as an emerald, one machine that can harvest 200 acres in a single day. The Soviet engineers were completely baffled. Their largest collective farm back home, with 20 men and 5 machines, barely processes 150 acres per day. But here's the part that shattered everything they thought they knew. Tom Richardson owns this monster. Not the state. Not a collective. Him. One farmer with one machine outproducing an entire Soviet operation. If a single American farmer could do the impossible, what else were they wrong about? Before we dive in, subscribe for more buried Cold War stories where the official history missed the human details. And comment where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these forgotten moments reach across the world. The Greyhound bus wheezed to a stop in a cloud of diesel exhaust and prairie dust, its air brakes hissing like a tired animal. Viktor Petrov stepped down onto the cracked asphalt of Cedar Falls, Iowa, his leather-soled shoes immediately collecting grit from the parking lot. The August sun hit him like a hammer, and he squinted against the glare bouncing off endless rows of corn that stretched to every horizon. Behind him, Dmitry Kozlov and Yuri Volkov climbed down more slowly, all three men wearing identical gray wool suits that had seemed sensible in Moscow but now clung to their backs like wet canvas in the Iowa heat. Viktor clutched his small notebook against his chest, the leather cover already damp with perspiration, and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. This was supposed to be farmland, but where were the villages? Where were the people? Just corn, corn everywhere, and a sky so wide it made him dizzy. A pickup truck rumbled toward them across the gravel parking lot, kicking up dust that caught the afternoon light. Behind the wheel sat a man in faded overalls and work boots, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind. Viktor had expected someone in an official capacity, perhaps a government agricultural representative or a collective farm administrator, but this man looked like he had just climbed down from a tractor. Tom Richardson stepped out of the truck and extended a calloused hand, his smile genuine and unhurried. Through their interpreter, a young woman from the Iowa State University Extension Office, Tom welcomed them with the kind of casual warmth that Viktor had only seen among close friends back home. "Hop in the back," Tom said, gesturing to the truck bed. "It's just a short ride to the farm." Viktor stared at the vehicle, trying to process what he was seeing. This farmer, this individual worker, owned this truck. Not the collective, not the state, but him personally. The interpreter noticed his hesitation and explained that yes, Tom had bought the truck himself, paid for it with money from his own farming operation. Dmitry and Yuri exchanged glances as they climbed into the truck bed, their notebooks already filling with observations that didn't quite fit their understanding of how agriculture was supposed to work. The truck bounced along a gravel road between walls of corn taller than a man's head, the plants healthy and uniform in a way that made Viktor's chest tighten with professional envy. Every few miles they passed another farmhouse, each sitting on its own island of green lawn with barns and silos clustered nearby like small industrial complexes. Tom called out over the engine noise, pointing to different fields and explaining crop rotations, soil management, and yield expectations with the casual expertise of someone who made these decisions daily without consulting committees or waiting for approval from district officials. The interpreter relayed his words, and Viktor scribbled notes frantically, trying to capture not just the technical details, but the underlying assumptions that seemed so foreign. Here was a system where individual farmers made choices about what to plant, when to harvest, which equipment to buy, all based on their own judgment and market conditions rather than 5-year plans or collective decisions. As they rounded Tom's red barn, Viktor's pen stopped moving entirely. Parked in the shade like a sleeping green giant sat the largest piece of agricultural machinery he had ever seen outside of a factory floor. The John Deere 7700 combine harvester gleamed in the dappled sunlight, its bright green paint job so perfect it looked like it had been polished that morning. 25 feet of cutting header stretched across the front like the mouth of some prehistoric beast, while the cab rose up high enough to give the operator a commanding view of the fields. Victor had operated combines for 15 years, had studied agricultural machinery design, had seen the newest Soviet models rolling off the production lines, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer scale and obvious quality of what he was looking at. The machine radiated competence and power, from its massive tires to its gleaming chrome exhaust stack. Every surface designed and built with an attention to detail that spoke of serious engineering and unlimited resources. "This is yours?" Victor asked through the interpreter, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom chuckled, the sound mixing with the buzz of cicadas in the nearby trees. "Yep, bought her new last spring. Cost me $67,000, but she'll cut 200 acres of corn in a single day if the conditions are right." Victor's notebook trembled slightly in his hands as he tried to write down the numbers. 200 acres in one day with one operator. Their largest collective farm back home with its crew of 20 men operating 5 different machines, processed maybe 150 acres on their best days. And that was with everyone working from dawn to dusk and frequent breakdowns that left them scrambling for replacement parts. The mathematics were impossible to ignore, and even more impossible to explain within the framework of everything he had been taught about American agricultural backwardness and inefficiency. But then Tom said something that stopped Victor's pencil entirely. "Course, I own all 800 acres outright," he mentioned casually, leaning against the truck's tailgate. "My grandfather bought this land back in 1923, and we've been farming it ever since. Every acre, every building, every machine. It's all mine." Victor looked up from his notebook, his eyes wide behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Not rented from the state, not assigned by a collective, not shared among dozens of families, but owned. Privately owned by one man who could make decisions about it without asking permission from anyone. The implications crashed over him like a cold wave. And suddenly this wasn't just about studying machinery anymore. This was about understanding a completely different way of organizing human society, one where individual ownership and personal responsibility produced results that their collective system, with all its theoretical advantages and social solidarity, simply could not match. Tom Richardson walked around to the front of the John Deere combine and pressed a lever that Victor hadn't even noticed. With a smooth hydraulic hiss, the entire engine hood lifted upward like the jaw of some mechanical whale, revealing an engine compartment so clean and organized it looked more like a laboratory than farm equipment. Victor stepped closer, his camera hanging heavy around his neck, and stared into the heart of American agricultural engineering. The turbocharged diesel engine sat there like a polished monument, bigger than most Soviet tractors, its 6 cylinders arranged in perfect symmetry beneath chrome valve covers that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Every component was labeled, every wire was color-coded, every connection looked like it had been installed by precision craftsmen rather than rushed through by quota-driven assembly workers. Dmitri pushed past him with his sketchpad already open, his mechanical engineer's eye immediately cataloging details that made Victor's head spin. "She's got a computer in there too," Tom said, pointing to a metal box mounted near the firewall. Victor blinked, certain he had misheard the translation. Computers belonged in research institutes and space programs, not on farming equipment operated by individual farmers in the middle of Iowa cornfields. But there it was. A genuine electronic control unit that monitored engine performance, adjusted fuel mixture, and optimized power output automatically based on field conditions. Tom explained that the machine could sense grain moisture levels and adjust the threshing cylinder speed accordingly, could detect when the cutting header was getting clogged and automatically reverse the augers to clear blockages, could even calculate harvest totals and display them on a small screen in the operator's cab. Victor had spent his career working with Soviet agricultural machinery, and their most advanced combines still required constant manual adjustment, frequent stops to unclog equipment, and handwritten logs to track productivity. The comparison haunted him as Tom continued the tour. Their SK5 Neva combine, the pride of Soviet agricultural engineering introduced just 2 years earlier, had a cutting width of 15 feet compared to the John Deere's 25. The Neva operated at a maximum speed of 2 to 3 miles per hour in good conditions, while this American machine cruised comfortably at 5 to 6 miles per hour through corn that would have forced them to slow down and baby their equipment. Most telling of all was the operator environment. Victor was accustomed to open cabs where dust and chaff swirled around the operator's head, where engine noise made conversation impossible, where summer heat and winter cold turned every harvest into an endurance test. Tom opened the cab door of the John Deere and gestured for Victor to climb up. Inside, he found himself in a climate-controlled capsule with cushioned seats, tinted glass windows, and even a stereo radio playing country music at a comfortable volume. The controls were ergonomically designed and clearly labeled, the visibility was excellent in every direction, and the whole experience felt more like sitting in a luxury car than operating farm machinery. "Want to try her?" Tom asked, holding out the keys with the casual confidence of someone who wasn't worried about his expensive equipment being damaged. Victor's hands shook slightly as he accepted them, partly from excitement and partly from the weight of responsibility. He had operated combines for 15 years, had trained dozens of younger operators, had troubleshot mechanical problems that left factory engineers scratching their heads. But he had never been trusted with a machine worth more than most Soviet workers earned in 30 years. The engine started with a smooth rumble that vibrated through the cab floor, and Victor engaged the hydraulics to lower the cutting header. Everything responded immediately and precisely. No grinding gears or bulky controls, no need to pump levers or coax reluctant machinery into cooperation. As he eased the combine forward into a test strip of corn, the machine began harvesting with an efficiency that made his chest tight with professional embarrassment. The corn stalks disappeared into the header like water flowing into a drain, while the threshing cylinder separated grain from chaff with mechanical precision that seemed almost supernatural. Clean kernels flowed into the grain tank while perfectly chopped stalks spread evenly behind the machine, creating a carpet of organic matter that would decompose and enrich the soil for next year's crop. Victor watched the yield monitor display numbers that made him double-check his mental calculations. In the 15 minutes he operated the machine, covering perhaps 20 acres, he had processed more corn than his 3-man crew back home typically managed in half a day of hard labor. The mathematics were undeniable and deeply troubling. This single machine, operated by one person in air-conditioned comfort, outproduced their entire collective farm team while using less fuel per acre and producing higher quality results. As Victor climbed down from the cab, his legs unsteady from more than just the physical exertion, Tom was already explaining the support system that made such productivity possible. John Deere dealerships dotted the countryside every 50 miles or so, each one stocked with thousands of replacement parts and staffed by factory-trained technicians who could make house calls within hours of a breakdown. If a farmer needed a specific component, he could drive to town and buy it off the shelf or order it and have it delivered the next day. The contrast with Soviet agriculture was stark and painful. Back home, a broken harvester might sit idle for weeks or months while operators waited for replacement parts to work their way through the central distribution system, assuming the parts existed at all. Innovation happened slowly if it happened at all. Filtered through bureaucratic committees that valued conformity over efficiency and political reliability over engineering excellence. Dmitri closed his sketchpad with a snap that sounded like a judgment being rendered. His drawings captured the technical specifications, but Victor could see in his colleague's eyes the same realization that was forming in his own mind. They had come to America expecting to find agricultural methods they could improve upon, techniques they could adapt to Soviet conditions, perhaps a few clever innovations they could copy and implement back home. Instead, they had discovered a system so fundamentally different from their own that simple technology transfer was impossible. The John Deere combine wasn't just better engineering, it was the product of entirely different assumptions about how society should organize economic activity, reward innovation, and motivate individual performance. The Richardson farmhouse kitchen smelled of coffee and cinnamon, warm light spilling from windows that looked out over fields where fireflies were beginning to blink in the gathering dusk. Mary Richardson moved between the counter and table with practiced efficiency, setting out white ceramic cups and thick slices of apple pie that steamed when she cut them, the crust golden brown and flaky in a way that made Victor's mouth water despite his nervousness. The three Soviet engineers sat stiffly around the wooden table, their notebooks and cameras arranged carefully beside their plates, while Tom spread out ledger books, manila folders stuffed with receipts, and production records that covered the table like pieces of an impossible puzzle. Victor had seen collective farm record-keeping before, usually a few handwritten logs kept by the farm manager and submitted quarterly to district officials. But this was something entirely different. Tom's documentation was meticulous and personal, every expense tracked, every yield calculated, every decision recorded in neat handwriting that spoke of a man who understood that his family's survival depended on getting the numbers exactly right. "Had a good year this season," Tom said, running his finger down a column of figures that made Victor's coffee cup rattle against its saucer when he tried to pick it up. Corn yielded about 140 bushels per acre on average. Soybeans came in around 55 bushels. Victor did the mental conversion from American measurements to metric tons per hectare, checking his math twice because the numbers seemed impossible. 140 bushels per acre translated to roughly 9 tons per hectare, compared to the collective farm average back home of maybe 5.5 tons per hectare in a good year. The difference wasn't marginal, it wasn't the kind of small improvement that could be explained by weather or luck or slightly better seed varieties. This was a fundamental gap in productivity that suggested something was deeply wrong with either Soviet agricultural methods or everything Victor had been taught about American farming inefficiency. Mary refilled their coffee cups and settled into her chair with her own slice of pie, the domestic normalcy of the scene making the conversation somehow more unsettling. Tom continued explaining his operation with the casual confidence of someone discussing the weather, mentioning gross income figures that made Yuri stop writing entirely. $180,000 in a single year from 800 acres worked by essentially one man with seasonal help during planting and harvest. Victor tried to put this in perspective with what he knew about collective farm economics. Their largest collective operation back home covered 15,000 acres, employed 120 families full-time, and generated perhaps $75,000 in total value after accounting for state-subsidized inputs and guaranteed purchase prices. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. Tom Richardson, working alone with his machines and making his own decisions, generated more agricultural value per acre than their entire collective system, with all its theoretical advantages of shared resources and centralized planning. "But how do you decide what to plant?" Yuri asked through the interpreter, his voice tight with the strain of trying to reconcile these numbers with everything he believed about economic organization. Tom looked puzzled by the question, explaining that he watched commodity prices, considered soil conditions, factored in weather forecasts, and made choices based on what would be most profitable for his family. No committee meetings, no 5-year plans, no approval from district agricultural officers. If he made good decisions, his family prospered. If he made mistakes, they suffered the consequences directly and immediately. The incentive structure was simple and personal in a way that made Victor feel slightly sick, not because it was wrong, but because it worked so obviously well. Mary excused herself to get ice cream from the freezer, and when she opened the heavy door, Victor stared in amazement at an abundance that seemed almost obscene by Soviet standards. The freezer was packed solid, with meat wrapped in white paper and labeled with dates, frozen vegetables in colorful packages, ice cream in multiple flavors, prepared meals in individual portions, enough food to feed a family for months, stored casually in one household appliance. Victor tried to calculate what all that food would cost in Soviet state stores, assuming it was even available, and came up with numbers that represented several months of an average worker's salary. Yet here it sat in a farmhouse kitchen, taken for granted like running water or electric lights, part of the background abundance that seemed to characterize every aspect of American life. What about the workers who actually pick the corn? Yuri pressed, his planning background making him focus on labor issues that the other engineers were overlooking. Tom explained that most of the harvest was mechanized, but he did hire seasonal help during the busiest periods, paying them $8 an hour plus overtime when they worked more than 40 hours per week. Yuri did quick mental calculations and realized that Tom's seasonal workers earned more per hour than many skilled technicians back home earned per day, and they worked in air-conditioned cab comfort rather than bending over in the fields under the brutal sun. The economic relationships didn't fit any of the theoretical frameworks he had studied. Where was the exploitation of the working class? Where were the contradictions of capitalism that were supposed to make the system unsustainable? Victor watched Mary serve the ice cream and tried to process what he was learning about American abundance. This wasn't just about agricultural productivity or mechanical engineering superiority. This was about a completely different way of organizing human society, one that generated wealth so efficiently that even individual farming families lived better than most Soviet citizens could imagine. The farmhouse around them was modest by American standards, Tom had explained, just a typical Midwestern agricultural operation, but it contained more material comfort and consumer choice than Victor had seen in the homes of high-ranking party officials back in Moscow. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the background, a sound that represented reliable electricity, efficient manufacturing, and the kind of taken-for-granted prosperity that Soviet propaganda insisted was impossible under capitalism. As the evening wore on and the numbers piled up in their notebooks, Victor felt something fundamental shifting in his understanding of the world. They had come to America expecting to find backward farming methods, inefficient resource allocation, and the contradictions of capitalist exploitation that their training had taught them to recognize. Instead, they found a system that worked better than anything they had imagined possible, generating abundance so casually that it seemed like a miracle rather than the result of human organization and individual effort. The rotary phone in Tom's kitchen rang with a harsh metallic sound that cut through the morning quiet like a saw blade, and Victor stared at it for a long moment before picking up the heavy black receiver. The international operator's voice crackled through layers of static as she connected him to Moscow, each electronic beep and click reminding him how far he was from home, how many layers of bureaucracy and suspicion lay between this Iowa farmhouse and the office where his supervisor sat behind a metal desk covered with reports and coffee rings. When the familiar voice finally came through the speaker, sounding thin and distorted across thousands of miles of cable, Victor felt his stomach clench with the certainty that this conversation would not go well. His supervisor's tone was already sharp with irritation, not just at being awakened in the middle of the Moscow night, but at the cost of the international call that would have to be justified in triplicate and approved by 3 different departments. Victor tried to explain what they had discovered, speaking carefully in Russian while Tom and Mary moved quietly around the kitchen, pretending not to listen to a conversation they couldn't understand but could clearly feel the tension of. He described the John Deere combine's productivity, the automatic systems, the comfort and efficiency that allowed one operator to outperform an entire Soviet crew. His supervisor's responses grew increasingly skeptical with each detail, his voice carrying the particular kind of suspicion that Victor recognized from political meetings where unconventional ideas were discussed and quickly dismissed. "These numbers you're reporting," the voice said through the static, "they sound like capitalist propaganda. Are you certain you're not being shown specially prepared demonstrations designed to impress foreign visitors?" Victor looked around the Richardson kitchen at the coffee pot plugging into the wall, at the telephone he was using that belonged to this individual farmer, at the casual abundance that surrounded him like air, and tried to find words that would make his supervisor understand that none of this was staged or artificial. The conversation continued for 23 minutes. Victor watching the clock on the kitchen wall and calculating the cost of international phone service that would eventually appear on Tom's monthly bill. His supervisor wanted detailed reports, written documentation, photographs that could be verified by technical experts back home, but underneath the bureaucratic requirements was a deeper unease about the political implications of what Victor was describing. If individual American farmers were really this productive, if capitalist agriculture was really this efficient, then what did that say about the collective system that employed millions of Soviet workers and consumed billions of rubles in state investment? The questions hung in the static-filled silence between Moscow and Iowa, and Victor realized that his supervisor wasn't just skeptical of the technical claims. He was afraid of what they might mean for his own position in a system that depended on the certainty that Soviet methods were superior to capitalist ones. Dmitry spent the morning after the phone call sketching modifications they could theoretically make to Soviet combines using principles they had observed in the John Deere design. His mechanical drawings were precise and detailed, showing how automatic header height adjustment could be retrofitted to existing machines, how computer-controlled threshing systems could optimize grain separation, how better cab design could improve operator comfort and productivity. But each improvement he sketched required something that was impossible to obtain through Soviet supply channels. The high-grade steel for precision manufacturing was allocated exclusively to military projects. The electronic components for automatic control systems didn't exist in Soviet factories, and importing them would require approval from committees that moved at glacial speed and viewed foreign technology with deep suspicion. Even replacement parts, the foundation of efficient mechanical operations, couldn't be manufactured and distributed profitably when there was no market incentive to maintain inventory or respond quickly to customer needs. That afternoon, Tom drove them into Cedar Falls proper, population 29,000, a town that seemed impossibly prosperous and well-maintained compared to similar agricultural centers back home. The John Deere dealership sat on Main Street like a temple to mechanical abundance, its glass showroom filled with bright green machinery that gleamed under fluorescent lights, each machine carrying price tags that represented more money than most Soviet families would see in a lifetime. Victor watched farmers in work clothes browse through combines and tractors with the casual confidence of customers evaluating different options, asking technical questions about hydraulic systems and engine specifications, discussing financing terms and trade-in values as if $100,000 purchases were routine decisions. The parts department stretched back into warehouse space that seemed to go on forever. Shelves stocked with thousands of components, organized by part number and cross-referenced in thick catalogs that were updated annually. The service department operated like a small factory, with hydraulic lifts and diagnostic equipment that could identify mechanical problems with electronic precision, technicians who made house calls to repair breakdowns in the field, trucks equipped with mobile workshops that brought the repair facility directly to stranded machines during harvest season. Everything operated on credit and profit and individual choice, concepts that seemed simple on the surface but created a web of economic relationships that Victor was only beginning to understand. Farmers could buy expensive equipment because they owned their land and kept their profits. Dealers could maintain huge inventories because they knew farmers would pay for quality and convenience. Manufacturers could innovate because competition rewarded better products with higher sales. The system worked because each participant had clear incentives and immediate consequences for their decisions. Victor's hotel room that evening felt like a cell after the abundance of the Richardson farm, and he sat on the narrow bed writing in his notebook with the desperation of someone trying to preserve memories that already felt like dreams. How do I explain to my wife that a single American farmer lives better than our entire village? He wrote in careful Cyrillic script. How do I tell my son that everything we've been taught about American farming inefficiency is wrong? The questions felt dangerous even written in private, the kind of thoughts that could end careers and ruin lives if they fell into the wrong hands. But they were also undeniably true, supported by mathematics and direct observation that couldn't be dismissed as capitalist propaganda or foreign deception. The telegram arrived the next morning while they were eating breakfast in the hotel restaurant, delivered by a Western Union messenger who seemed unaware that he was delivering a political judgment. "Return immediately," the message read in Russian. "Exchange program being reassessed. Report for debriefing upon arrival Moscow." Victor folded the yellow paper carefully and put it in his jacket pocket, feeling the weight of institutional power reaching across an ocean to pull him back into a system that suddenly felt small and fearful compared to the mechanical abundance he was leaving behind. Victor sat alone on Tom Richardson's front porch as the sun crept over the Iowa horizon, painting the cornfields gold and casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the farmyard. In the distance, barely visible through the morning haze, the green shape of the John Deere combine moved through the corn like a ship navigating an ocean of grain, its cutting header disappearing and reappearing as it followed the contours of the rolling field. This was their last morning in America, and Victor felt the weight of returning to Moscow settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. His notebook lay open on his lap, pages filled with measurements and observations and questions that he wasn't sure how to answer, but the pencil remained motionless in his fingers as he tried to process everything he had learned during these few days that felt like a lifetime of discovery. The screen door creaked behind him, and Tom appeared with 2 steaming cups of coffee. Settling into the wooden chair beside Victor with the unhurried movements of a man who had started thousands of mornings this same way. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the combine work its methodical pattern across the distant field, the sound of its engine carried on the morning breeze like a mechanical heartbeat. Through the interpreter who had arrived early to help with their departure preparations, Tom began talking about farming in a way that Victor had never heard before, not as economics or politics or ideology, but as something deeper and more fundamental. "You know," Tom said, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug, "doesn't matter if you're in Iowa or Russia, farming's still about the same things. You watch the sky for rain, you worry about frost, you take pride in a good harvest. The machinery changes, the politics change, but the relationship between a man and the land, that stays the same." Victor nodded slowly, feeling something shift in his understanding as he watched the morning light strengthen across the cornfields. For 3 days, he had been focused on productivity numbers and mechanical specifications, on economic systems and political implications, but Tom was talking about something that transcended all of that. Despite the vast differences in their agricultural systems, despite the political tensions between their countries, despite the language barriers and cultural gaps, they were both farmers at heart. Both men who worked with soil and weather and growing things, both worried about feeding people, both understood the satisfaction of coaxing abundance from the earth through knowledge and hard work and careful attention to detail. The realization felt both simple and profound, like discovering that 2 different languages had the same word for love. When it came time to leave, Tom disappeared into the house and returned with a green John Deere baseball cap and a thick service manual bound in plastic covers. "For your son," he said through the interpreter, pressing both items into Victor's hands with the gentle insistence of someone giving a gift that mattered. Victor stared at the cap, running his fingers over the leaping Deere logo embroidered in yellow thread, thinking about his 12-year-old boy back home who collected pictures of tractors and dreamed of becoming an agricultural engineer. In return, Victor unpinned the small metal badge from his jacket lapel, the Soviet engineer's insignia that he had earned through years of night school and field work, and offered it to Tom with hands that shook slightly from emotion. The exchange took only a moment, but it felt like a bridge spanning the vast distance between 2 worlds, 2 men recognizing in each other something that politics and ideology couldn't touch. At the Cedar Rapids airport, Victor opened his notebook one final time and began writing what he knew would be his most important entry. "We came to study machines and discovered humanity," he wrote in careful Cyrillic script, the words flowing faster as his thoughts clarified. "American abundance isn't just about technology or superior engineering. It's about freedom to fail and freedom to succeed. About individuals taking personal responsibility for their choices and living with the consequences. We have community and security, the knowledge that the collective will provide for basic needs regardless of individual performance. They have opportunity and risk, the chance to prosper greatly or suffer greatly based on their own decisions and abilities. Both systems feed people. Both have dignity. Both reflect different beliefs about human nature and social organization. He paused, looking out the airport window at the Iowa landscape one last time, then added, "Different doesn't mean wrong, it just means different." The flight back to Moscow felt longer than the journey to America, and Victor spent most of it staring out the window at clouds and ocean, thinking about how to translate his experiences into language that wouldn't get him reassigned to some remote agricultural station in Siberia. Back at the collective farm, he began implementing small changes that he hoped no one would notice, adjusting maintenance schedules to reduce downtime, creating informal incentives that rewarded operators for careful handling of equipment, organizing work crews in ways that gave individuals more responsibility for their results. Nothing revolutionary, nothing that challenged the fundamental structure of collective agriculture, just quiet improvements that increased efficiency without attracting political attention. His son treasured the John Deere cap, wearing it constantly, despite his mother's complaints that it made him look like a capitalist, and Victor would sometimes catch the boy staring at the service manual, even though he couldn't read English, studying the detailed diagrams of hydraulic systems and mechanical components with the focused intensity of someone dreaming about possibilities. Years later, when Gorbachev introduced perestroika and glasnost, when the Soviet Union began acknowledging that other countries might have valuable ideas worth adopting, Victor would remember this Iowa farm as the place where he first understood that learning from others wasn't betrayal, but wisdom. That strength came not from rigid ideology, but from the courage to recognize truth wherever it might be found.